Okay, are we doing the thing?
Wait, are we doing the thing? I don't know. I'm not in charge.
I know, I was asking
All right,
who
we're
was in
about to
charge.
do the thing. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Talk Math with your friends. It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Dr. Emerald Stacy, a periodic number theorist from Washington College, where she's also described herself as a gender studies professor in disguise. And today she's going to be talking to us about the pedagogy and structures relating to the teaching of differential calculus without prerequisites or exams. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Stacy.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can get my screen shared properly. Always the challenge. There we go. Is it properly shared? Can you see the title screen? Excellent. So I first put together this idea of talking math with your friends because I really wanted to be worthy of being part of talking math with your friends. I was watching this kind of transpire over Twitter, and I was watching the players involved, and these are people I follow on Twitter, and I was like, I want to be in these conversations. And so in a moment of bravery, probably 6 weeks ago, I applied to give a talk. And one of the more interesting things I think that I'm doing right now professionally is the way that I'm teaching differential calculus, which is without prerequisites or exams. So I thought that might be of interest. But what it's really turned into is a story of belonging. Who belongs in mathematics? Where do I belong? Where do we all belong? What does it mean to feel like you belong? So to give you a little background, I am the child of both an artist and a math educator. So it was never a question whether I could be a mathematician. It was possibly a question whether I could ever pass a class or get my homework done on time or learn to do my laundry. But mathematician was always an identity that I was allowed to have. It was always, I was allowed to be a mathematician and I was allowed to get a PhD in mathematics. And that was something that I knew from a very young age that I was allowed to do. Which is, I know, quite unique. But there certainly are places where I have struggled to feel belonging. So first, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. I acknowledge that my home sits on land within the territory of the Piscataway people, who are the original stewards of this land. 1.7% of people in the United States identify as American Indian or Alaska Native, while 0.068% of math and statistics PhDs in the United States from 2013 to 2018 actually went to people who identify as American Indian or Alaska Native. If you're interested to do 1.7 divided by 0.068, it is 25, which means Native Americans are underrepresented with a multiplicative factor of 25, which is wild. Of the 11,000 PhDs that were given out in math and statistics in that time, only 8 went to Native Americans. I am not one of those 8, though I did earn a PhD during that time. But I never clicked the box on the NSF paperwork to identify as Native American, and I don't identify as Native American during a consensus. I don't feel like I belong in that identity, although my great-grandfather was full-blooded Mescalero Apache. So that's something that I struggle with. Where do I belong there? Am I allowed to claim that identity? Is that appropriation? I certainly have white privilege. I'm working on it. So I think that in the beginning of every talk, it's often good to have some learning outcomes, but I'm going to make it a little bigger and just say goals for life. And my goal for life is to feel like I belong. I work on that a lot. I work on it in therapy. I work on it in my accountability meetings professionally. And what does that mean for me professionally? It means that my goal is to remove barriers that prevent others from feeling like they belong. So there are certainly many times, as a professor, there are many times when I am in charge of the space and I am in charge of what the space feels like and what those barriers feel like. So let's talk about grad school. We'll go back a bit before we get to where we are, because it really, it's all takes place within context of me being an oddball. So how grad school started. Well, 2 weeks in, I was about to drop out. I was pretty convinced that dropping out was 100% the best idea. Real analysis was terrifying. Melissa's shaking her head, but you know this is funny. And I called my BFF, Melissa, and I said, we made a mistake. When we thought it was a good idea for me to go to grad school, that was an oopsie daisy. We have to abort. You know, you always say nothing's permanent. We can always fix it. We got to be done. We got to pull the plug. And she said, okay, I hear you. Will you please give it 2 more weeks? I will meet you in Portland in 2 weeks, and we will spend a weekend in a hotel room and the mall. We spent 8 hours in that mall. I don't think we bought anything. And of course, while we were at the hotel, I locked my keys in the car. So this is the image that always pops up on our Facebook timelines to remind us of when I almost dropped out of grad school, but didn't drop out of grad school. I think she 2 more weeks to me the whole way through. So how did grad school go? It went well, I would say. Graduated, got the PhD. Here's a picture of me and Melissa the day that I defended my PhD. Turns out, did get the doctor. How is it going now? Well, she went and got herself a graduate degree because, you know, why not? You're welcome, Melissa. So grad school went well. A bit rocky in the beginning, but I'd say it worked out okay. So what did it mean for me to belong in grad school? So the places that I really found I belonged in grad school really didn't live necessarily within the math department. While I was at Oregon State, I got a graduate certificate in college and university teaching. I did a minor in women, gender, and sexuality studies. And I also coordinated the graduate teaching assistant orientation for about 300 grad students that started each year. I coordinated that training with the incredible Claire Gibbons, who is featured in this photo of me in Chicago back when we had conferences wearing the same shirt. This was when we went on a like one of those evening cruises to see the sunset over the water. It was fantastic. I think it was when Math Fest was in Chicago. So while I was in grad school, I had my feet in like a lot of really kind of oddball places that you wouldn't necessarily expect somebody who was doing their research in number theory to exist in. I had a lot of different opportunities being put in charge of coordinating this orientation, where Claire and I were developing and training graduate students to develop and facilitate their own sessions in orientation. Was really about this kind of feminist leadership structure where it was really not necessarily hierarchy. It was very horizontal. We were really empowering people to be teachers while they were learning. And Claire dropped this tweet about me yesterday, which made me cry. Like, let's be fair. So I had to include it. There was a different picture of us there, but I had to adjust it. So fast forward, I'm now at Washington College, which is affectionately referred to as WAC. There's a problem here. There's a big problem. The on-ramp into STEM is rough. Math placement tests, not enforced. Students take math placement tests. The advisor says, I don't know what the advisor says. And then students register for whatever course follows their whim, which means that we had a lot of students taking differential calculus who perhaps would be better served doing something a little different. One thing we found was that pre-calculus was ineffective at preparing students for differential calculus. So once a year, we offered a pre-calculus class, and it turns out taking the pre-calculus class didn't actually prepare students to do better in calculus. And our DFW rate was over 30%. Now, Washington College is a small liberal arts school, and this was one of the top 5 DFW rates of the entire school. This was absurdly high as far as the administration was concerned. Something had to be done. There were unhappy parents. This had to be fixed. Before I got to Washington College, there were some discussions about some different ideas. This idea of a year-long calculus class was kind of floated around in the way that ideas get floated around amongst academics and then nothing happens. So I joined the staff fall 2018. And in April 2019, so this is my second semester, this man who uses they, them pronouns, I shouldn't have said man, Dr. Eric Anthony Grallman came and led a workshop called Becoming an Intellectual Activist. And I went to this workshop because I was really wanted to do some work around who was I going to be as a professor? How was I going to make an impact? How was I going to help remove those barriers for other people? And I didn't really have a mission. I didn't have a learning outcome. I didn't have a goal. I couldn't make lists. I needed some guidance. And during this session, there was a Black female identified student who shared that she did not feel, and that students of color in general did not feel that they belonged in our science building, which is where huge study spaces are. It's where tons of community is built. They didn't feel like they belonged in our math classes, and they didn't feel like they belonged at STEM in Washington College. And that's a problem. That's a problem that we need to work on. And so I decided to make a plan, because I could make a plan for that. And so my plan was that we were going to drop pre-calculus and we were going to add stretch differential, and we were just going to do it. I was able to bulldoze over some of the faculty who were resistant with my unending charm. And I was able to kind of get this pushed through as a, well, we'll try it once, I suppose. Some of the comments were, well, it'll get the dead wood out of differential type of things, which fine. Like if it meant that they let me do what I wanted to do, I was okay with that. So I now teach a course called Stretch Differential Calculus. It's a year long, 2 semesters. We do everything you do in differential with all prerequisite material in the course. I assume like some pre-algebra. I assume that like if I say solve for X, you kind of maybe know that that means X needs to be by itself. So we start with function notation. You know, gotta lay the definitions down. We start with equations of a line, slope. What does that all mean? We do a unit on polynomials. The only things about polynomials I teach at that point is exactly what I am going to ask them about later. All right, I'm going to want them to be able to find those roots of the polynomial so we can find those critical values. So that's really what we focus on when we look at polynomials, is how to find those roots. We go through motion and optimization. Then in spring, we come in and we start trig. We do some circles and some Desmos activities with circles and like some curves that aren't explicit functions before we go into related rates and implicit differentiation. We're going to be able to hit 2D motion this year for the first time. The ball is not only going to go up, but also to the side. Very excited. And we actually get to the fundamental theorem of calculus in this class, which we don't get to in our traditional differential class at this school.
Emerald, is this twice as many credits or this as it would be in a 1 semester course?
Yes, great question. So yes, so each class is 4 credits, which is how many our credits are, of courses are all 4 credits. So you take both classes. If you only do the first one, you get 4 credits of elective. If you do both, you get 8 credits of quantitative. So you can knock out, at our school, you need either 2 quantitative and a lab course or 2 lab courses and a quantitative for our general ed. So you can knock out your 2 quantitative courses with Stretch.
And for your students who might need more calculus, is it you just have to finish both of these and then the standard Calc 2 is the next thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's actually designed in such a way so that if we have a student who comes in fall and is super gung-ho and really wants to take integral with the second semester, they can actually do integral on top of the second half of Stretch. Carefully and like with some professor coordination. So I've talked a little bit about the importance of belonging and what it means to feel like you belong. This is where I teach math in non-COVID times. This is the Lit House. It's a poetry reading station. Gosh, I just look at it and I miss it. We sit in a circle. In the house, there's a tea station and couches and big chalkboards on walls and books all over the place, and you can just make yourself at home. And the director of the Lit House will like come downstairs and just say, "Oh, I'm so glad you're all here. We just love that you're here. You know, we love it that the math classes come here." And so there's just this really warm and welcoming, safe place to come and try something new. These are some of my amazing students that I had during the first semester I taught this. They did know that the selfies we were taking would be used in talks. There was consent. They were very excited about it. So while this is happening, there's kind of this other story at my college that starts happening, which I will, for the purposes of this talk, call Black Lives Matter at WAC 2, which was one of the chants that got chanted at my school many, many times over the last year. Last year, academic year, we had many incidents of local high school students driving through our campus and yelling racial slurs at our students of color. It was really yucky. And nobody really knew what to do. They weren't college students. They were, underage. I don't even know. February 21st, 2020, the BSU led a march on campus, actually led a march towards convocation, and took over the convocation auditorium and prevented convocation from starting for quite some time. I still don't think they knew exactly what they wanted to happen, but they knew that something needed to happen. In March, we had a town hall with our president and provost and dean of students, a couple other people, and our Black Student Union provided a list of demands. And one of the demands was that we have diversity training, because at my institution, we do not have mandatory diversity or Title IX training. Not annually, never. So the Black Student Union has said we have to have this training. This is really important. Since then, over the summer, I have become chair of our diversity committee, which was kind of tasked with the kind of responding to this demand. And what's happened is JEDI was born. So JEDI, standing for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which I first saw that language around kind of all the math conversations on Twitter that were taking place right after the notices, Abigail Thompson's notice in the AMS. This painting is by David Mack, who's an incredible comic book artist that I reached out to, and I said, I really, really love this painting. We're doing this thing. Can I use your painting as our branding? Please, I have no money. And he wrote back and said, yes, absolutely, best of luck. I'm so glad that I could help in any way possible. So what is JEDI? So it's a collaborative, sustainable training series that's being developed in-house by a team of now more than 25 faculty, staff, and students. We currently have 4 sessions that are launching in February. One on mitigating microaggressions, rethinking what it means to be a bystander. One on courageous conversations, both how to facilitate courageous conversations and how to participate in courageous conversations. Anti-racism and trauma-related health disparities, which is actually going to go into the epigenetics and talk about the biology of what happens to a body when it undergoes trauma. So this is not perfect. None of us are perfect. I am not a professional DEI person, although I would like to be. But this is a project that's being built with a ton of passion and grace. So we have people coming together saying, I don't really know a lot about this, but I want to know more about this. So like, let's dive in and let's do the session that I know the least about. Like, let's push myself. Or some people are choosing to work on a session that they do know more about, and that's fine. But this has been really, really cool to see develop, and it's being developed. I think of it as really closely related to my stretch calculus classes, because these two are the two things that I work on creating every day. So for me, this is what my passion is going into. We have a huge team. Our team is now comprised of faculty members, staff members, students, and we now have our first volunteer from outside. Thanks, Melissa. You'll notice that there's a lot of different stars going on there. This is a mix of all sorts of different types of people all across campus who have all volunteered their time to help work on building a training that is sustainable and that we can continue working through at Washington College. So that started this summer. 2 weeks into fall semester, my very dear friend Claire says, you got to watch Spencer's talk. It has me rethinking everything. I did say this was 2 weeks into the semester. He explains that we grade students the way we grade meat. Oh, okay. So I go and I watch this talk, Ungrading as Resistance by the incredible Spencer Bagley. And now I have to redo my syllabus 2 weeks into the semester, because I was so rocked by this talk that it felt like if I continued, it felt unethical for me to continue with my syllabus the way it was. So I went to my classes, I posted the video. I said, if you want to know why we're doing this, here's the video, but we have to change everything. I really meant, I actually have the video of BK introducing Lobo with a Cause. Lobo with a Cause is the Twitter handle of Dr. And I was going to Belin Sinigini. Thank you. I was going to practice saying the name so that like I could feel awesome. And I'm just now realizing that I forgot to do that. So Spencer's talk had kind of referenced back to Belin's talk, which was also a TMF Talking Math with Your Friends talk, where they had talked about Indigenous genocide and chattel slavery. So it's really like, to me, it's all really interconnected of, you know, I really don't want to help my students' future employers exploit them as resources. Period. I don't want to do it. I want nothing to do with it. So then we have to step back and be like, okay, well then what is this all for? What is education actually about? What is the purpose of assessment? So standards-based grading, is that what we do next? That seems to be the move. So we had these categories in my grading system: participation, persistence, and citizenship. We have 32 days of class. We have 14 online homework assignments. We have 5 written homework assignments. The first one is an autobiography, a mathematical autobiography, where they spill their trauma. And some sort of synthesis-y something. And so we sat down as a class and we decided what it meant to earn an A. You know, how many days do you need to do? How many homework assignments do you need to do? You know, you can redo it as many times as you want. You can fix anything you need to fix, but what's the mark? Where's the line? And so the students said, you know, I think the line is here. And I had to say, like, It's, actually a little lower than that, but, students tend to be so hard on themselves. But then there's this question of the synthesis project or the summative assessment. So what do we really do there? So last year, I gave an exam or two a semester, and then there was a project. Students picked something that they were passionate about. They somehow attached it to calculus because there's no topic that you can't connect calculus to. And then they explored how calculus is related to that project. I've had a theater student talk about the pulleys behind the scenes and how you like move sets and everything. There's a ton of kinematics going on in there. This year, what I did is I wanted to kind of go through the process of getting to the exam, but without doing the exam. So I wanted to like do the review. I wanted them to like make the one sheet with like kind of the bottom lines of everything, maybe do a deep dive into one topic, but then not take the exam. But then I had a few students who were like, actually an exam is private between me and the professor. And I would really like my summative assessment to be private. So how can we make something private? So I said, well, we could do an oral exam. I'm okay with that, right? I can adapt the questions to like get the student to get there. I'm okay with an oral exam. And then I had a student who doesn't have a mic or a camera, an international student living on campus. So, okay, a take-home exam is okay too. So what I had students do is they either led a review on a particular topic. So they did like a PowerPoint presentation and they did a deep dive into polynomials or kinematics or the power rule, did some examples, tips and tricks, really taught a lesson on it to like help the test takers review for their test. Or they could make the review sheet, distribute the review sheet and kind of talk it through in front of the class, or they could take the exam. So what it really felt like was the whole class was coming together and like prepping the test takers to go take the test. And then the only people who took the test were people who thought that was actually the least stressful option. So how did it go? What happened? What did they say? The synthesis project encouraged me to dive deeper into the topic. I appreciated that the course isn't just memorization based, but rather developing skills to conceptualize these topics. I won, right? Like, mic drop, did it, put a stamp on it. I did the thing. Our love for math blossomed. This was by a test taker. Our love for math blossomed? Nobody ever gets any student to actually like math more after a math class. It's amazing. This student is actually declared as a math major now. This student I worked with during an open house before they came to our school. And I took her and her family to the lit house. I showed her the space. I talked about stretch calculus. She's one of those students who's really nervous about the quantitative requirement. And ultimately she chose to come to Washington College so she could take stretch differential calculus as her quantitative. No pressure, but like I needed not to screw this up for her. And she did a wonderful guide on the stretch calc survival guide. And she said, making mistakes wasn't a worry for me as I felt comfortable being vulnerable and learning with my classmates. I think I can retire. Like, I also thought it was a good tool to show what we know and what we think we know, but we actually don't. And I think to me, that is the piece that tests actually get to, right? Tests often remind students that just because they're familiar with the language, just because they're familiar with some of the wording around something, doesn't mean they actually know it. And so for me to hear that the synthesis project helped them see what they knew and what they didn't tells me that the synthesis project is doing exactly what I would hope an exam would do without grading my students like meat.
We have 2 questions, Emerald.
Yes.
One is, how big a group is this? And the other is, how did you solicit this feedback from the group?
Great question. So I have 2 sections of this course. One is 20 students and one is 9. So 20 is a very large class at my school. The feedback I solicited because I have a paper being submitted to the MAA notes on diversity issues in calculus. And one of the revisions were due a couple days ago. And one of the pieces of feedback they wanted was, or me to add, was student feedback on the synthesis activities that I'm doing. And so I posted an announcement in Canvas and said, hey, I have a paper due tonight and I need, so if you feel like you have some quotes or some sentences you'd like to write me about what you thought of this assignment, please let me know. And I got these beautiful emails from students. So I know who they are, and I definitely was like, please help. That was really the end of my prepared material. I had meant to do a 3, 2, 1, go, but then I went into this whole belonging thing and it didn't fit. So perhaps we should do a 3, 2, 1, go now, because I would hate to disappoint. So I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see the chat. Okay, so a 3, 2, 1, go activity is I'm going to ask you a question and you are going to type your answer in the chat, but don't hit enter. Then I'm going to say 3, 2, 1, go, and you'll hit enter. So the idea here is that we'll actually have a moment for everyone to really think through exactly what they want to write. And then all the answers will pop up at once. So here is my first question. What does it mean to be a mathematician? To answer a question in the chat, when I grade the synthesis projects, are they graded using points? No. They are graded using exceeds expectations, meets expectations, does not meet expectations. If it is meets expectations or does not meet expectations, I will give feedback for what they could do to change it, to have it meet expectations or exceed expectations. And then it is up to the student to decide whether they want to change that or not. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go! Pattern seekers, learning about patterns. The identity is whether they can see that being a mathematician is central to who they are. Interesting. Thinking critically and solving problems you've never seen before. This requires creativity. Absolutely. I actually took the section out of my talk that was all about creativity and why math is a creative thing. Using math to understand the world or get things done in both professional and personal life means you spend time thinking about math, whatever that means. Use the tools, all the tools at your disposal to solve problems. These are excellent. Emmy, a mathematician is anyone who does math IMO. By the way, Emmy, that is how I spelled my name when I was younger, because I went by Emmy as a kid. I follow you on Twitter. It means that you have habits of the mind and approach problems with them, reasoning about extreme cases, using abstraction, quantitative reasoning. Joshua says, my wife was definitely a mathematician, even when she didn't identify as one. Yeah, I mean, I think being a mathematician and identifying as a mathematician are two very, very different things. I knew it was from a really young age that I was allowed to identify as a mathematician, but I don't know that I was a mathematician. Maybe I was. I definitely identify as a mathematician now. We talk in my class, in my stretch calculus class, we talk about how my definition of mathematician is one who does math. And that in my class, if we are engaged in doing math, that means that during that time in that class that all of my students are being mathematicians. My wife was definitely a mathematician even when she didn't identify as one. She called herself a recovering mathematician for several years, but now she's admitted she's totally off the wagon. Tian, a few years after you defended before you called yourself a mathematician. Interesting. I felt more like a mathematician in grad school than I do now. Kim said that there's been some discussions about whether someone without a PhD could call themselves a mathematician. Oh, I would definitely think so. And what does it mean to get a PhD? It means you jumped through a lot of bureaucratic hoops. It meant you convinced a committee not of your peers that you were worthy. Drew says he wasn't comfortable calling himself one until he had a PhD, but in retrospect, that was silly. You can't call yourself a medical practitioner without a degree. That's true. That's true. Ramanujan didn't have a degree. Is Ramanujan a mathematician?
I really more wanted to make the point that it might not be obvious to an inexperienced person that the degree doesn't matter so much.
That's true. Yeah. Maybe you have to have discovered new mathematics. So when you create a solution to a problem, when you're creating a solution in your research or in a classroom, if somebody else has created it before you, but you create it independently, does that take away from your creation? Shall we elect a Congress that is representative of all humanity in order to decide whether a result indeed counts as new? Perhaps, right? We're in academia, and in academia, we have this kind of self-regulating who counts as an academic, right? You go through these systems, you go through graduate school, and the people who decide whether you get bestowed upon with a graduate degree are people who have gone before you. And what it means to belong in graduate school, what it means to belong amongst academics, I think is, I totally lost my train of thought. What it means to belong in academia is decided by people who have gone before you. And if the people who have gone before you are not committed to removing the barriers for the people who come after them to feeling belonging, then there's so much gatekeeping that can take place. So for example, I'm not certainly anywhere close to the first woman to get a PhD, but 50 years ago, there were very few women going and getting PhDs. And the question then becomes, how do those women treat the future female mathematicians? Do they make it easier for future female mathematicians to belong, to succeed? Or do they want to ensure that future female mathematicians go through exactly the same pain that they went through?
It's not only their responsibility though, right?
Sure.
It may not be theirs at all, but it's certainly the hegemony has some responsibility.
Got a question from Claire. Are there things you can share about seeing students come into Stretch Calc and struggling, since there's no prerequisites? I'm curious how that might affect their feelings of belonging or being a mathematician. Hey, Alex, how you doing?
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm Emerald's student, and I was also in her first year seminar class last year. But I have not found that not being in a prerequisite class or having exams has changed how the class is structured. I still feel like everyone in the class, myself included, are still able to learn the materials and get everything done without skipping a beat, because I think Professor Stacy does a great job of like showing every single step of the way without skipping over anything or just fast forwarding all the way to the final step.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Joshua asks, how does my school feel about my grading system? Oh, they don't care. I came from Oregon State, which is, big R1, grades have to be at least 75% times traditional assessments or 80% or something. And then I came here and I went to my chair with my syllabus and was like, I have a project instead of a final exam. Are you going to fire me? And he was like, no, that seems great, but are you sure you can handle that grading load? That seems like it's a lot of work for you. Are you going to be okay? That's the part of it that you're worried about? No, we're fine. So I have gotten no pushback from my school. And in fact, my entire department, every math faculty in my department, there are 5 of us, are all pre-tenure. 3 of us are Project Next graduates. So there's a bit of an indoctrination of a very particular type of culture around teaching. We have a book club, although that is on hold this year because COVID. We have a book club where we read things like the IP Guide by the MAA. We've read Francis Sue's book. We read Whistling Vivaldi. So there's already a lot of conversation and goodness and support around mastery grading and alternative assessments and really trying to make these courses more writing based.
Have you thought about going all the way to doing PassFail Only?
Oh, I haven't. Interesting. I'm really close this semester. I think I have 2 students who aren't going to be either A's or F's.
So a while back, Moira asked us if you use a textbook and how you said a little bit about how you include the just-in-time teaching, but saying more than that. And then Kim, sort of related to that, asks, so can you identify some fluff in what would have been the pre-calculus if you're that maybe the rest of us can remove?
Sure. So to the first question, I don't really use a textbook. I offer my students the links to active calculus. And with each topic, I give them the links to the proper sections from active calculus or prelude to calculus that might help them. But the course is really self-contained. Everything that you need for the homework assignments is all within the notes. I lecture for about 5 to 8 minutes a day. And then we go straight into active learning and students present at the end of each day. And everything that they need is actually contained in there. The next question, will you remind me what the second question was?
Is there any fluff in the pre?
Oh.
Pre-cal? I don't know what standard means, but
Yeah. So, you know, I haven't actually taught a pre-calculus course in many, many years. So I'm not exactly sure what would be identified as fluff, but I would say most of it.
Claire, do you want to jump in and share?
Sure. Well, every time I teach, I call Emerald up when I'm planning a lesson and go, do I need to teach this? And she always goes, no, why would you need to teach that? So I try to think of an example from pre-calc. Like Emerald, do you teach how to add rational functions?
No.
Okay, so don't do
Wolfram
that.
does it for you.
Do you do asymptotes of rational functions?
I mean, no, we look at the graphs and see like, oh yeah, huh, look at that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I mean, we could probably just go down the list and ask things, and it's like, well, do we need that for calculus? I think is the question that you usually ask yourself, right?
Right.
Do I need that to do differential calculus?
And not even just do I need it to do differential calculus, but do I need it to do differential calculus the way I teach it? Right, because I think often there's this like back and forth of like, well, we have to teach this in pre-calculus because it's needed in calculus. We have to teach this in calculus because we go over it in pre-calculus and they're connected. Right, or you could take both of them away.
So Moira asked a related question. Do you have a theory for why the pre-calc wasn't preparing them to succeed in calculus?
I think
Is
that
it misaligned? I mean, the theory was misalignment, right?
Right. I think misalignment, and because the pre-calculus was very procedural and like computational, whereas the calculus classes, no matter who's teaching it, are very conceptual. So if you're going into a super conceptual calculus class, then all of the algebraic gymnastics you learn in pre-calculus aren't going to help you. But they're going to make you feel strong.
You asked us to prepare a link.
Oh, I did.
You want to tell us about why you wanted to talk about this one?
Yes, thank you so very much. I'm so glad I have keepers. So there's a link to an article called The Pedagogy of Kindness, and I strong recommend. It's a 5-minute read. And it really kind of gets at the heart of this idea of believing in students and believing students. So I really try to put through my teaching practice both of those things. If a student tells me they need an extension, they need an extension. I don't care why. They need it. If a student tells me, I mean, I don't know, I just, believing students is trusting them when they mean what they say. If they say it's hard, it's hard. If they say it's not hard, I just don't have time for it, then it's not hard, they just don't have time for it. And then believing in students is about really trusting them to be the leaders of their own education. Trusting that if I offer them an easy option and a hard option, that they'll make a good choice. So for example, with the synthesis project, there were multiple choices that they could take. So for example, I had a student who was really struggling with kinematics, but really understood average rate of change. And so I talked to the student and I said, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to go for the gold? Do you want to try to push yourself? Do you want to try to figure out how to nail kinematics? Or do you need a lighter week? Do you need to do average rate of change, which is something you already have mastered, and just do a really nice job of it? They ended up doing kinematics. But trusting that students really will make good decisions when given the option, that they won't always choose the easy way out, or that if they do choose the easy way out, that was the right choice. Trusting students is such a tough sell when you look at college first years. I don't know, I teach a lot of first year students. I teach in the first year seminar program through my school. And so that's a course that we offer in fall. Every incoming freshman has to take it. Alex took it with me last year. I teach one called Genius: Deconstructing the Idea of Intelligence. and we look at how knowledge is socially constructed through race, class, and gender, and how the ways that we measure knowledge, or what we are consider valuable knowledge, is socially constructed, and that it's all through a lens. And every year, that group of students gives me hope. When I look at that group of 15 students who come and have these really hard conversations about race and literacy tests and eugenics and what does it mean to be a mathematician. We read The Sexual Politics of Genius by Moon Dukin, and I really see them throw themselves into these conversations. It really gives me hope for the future. Like, these people are about to vote or have just voted. These people are going to be CEOs in 15 years. These people are going to be leading hiring committees in 10 years. And I think that if by having that default, if my default setting is believing that my students are absolutely incredible human beings who will make good decisions, that they do. I don't know, Alex, do you want to say anything about that? You were in that FYS.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'll just say that actually starting on the first day, we sort of delved into those hard conversations and those tough topics to talk about with others. And Professor Stacy made it, well, she was a great moderator for the class in the sense that she was able to get the most out of people while also keeping it a safe space for all, for them to feel comfortable to share their stories, share their tales, and share how everything was. And at Washington College, being as non-diverse as it is, I think she did a really good job given the group that we had with being politically correct and being conscious of how everyone was feeling with regards to what you were saying.
Alex always says things excellently. I'm keeping him. He's now in my Stretch Calculus class, and he's part of the Jedi team.
So we had a question a while back. Could you say a little bit more about how you negotiate expectations? Because it does seem like if you're not careful, you have this sort of lovely collaborative thing, and then you're like, and I'm the decider, or something like that. So can you tell us a little bit about that phase of this work?
So I definitely, we talk about the power dynamic, right? We talk that even though I let them call me Emerald, that ultimately I am the person who puts the grade on their transcript, and that that there is a sense in which I have some power. I have a lot of power. I've never really had anyone here in the last couple of years question my authority or really try to push back or push those boundaries. My first year I did. But I mean, I kind of open it up to them on the first day, and I talk about how, they can have either version of me, right? I'm a Scorpio. They can have like happy, fun loving, let's just laugh all the time. Or like, I can put my foot down, and nobody wants me to put my foot down. I don't want me to put my foot down. That sounds very boring. It sounds not fun. It makes class seem less fun for me. And so if we just all agree to just think I'm funny and go with the flow and accept the boundaries where they are, that like this is the direction the class will go. So I think it's something that I navigate, but I don't navigate very consciously, is my answer. But this is it's interesting because this is a question that I've gotten since the first quarter I started teaching. Why is it that we assume we have power to grant them agency or not? Yeah. Oh, I tell my students on day one, they need to just think I'm funny. Otherwise, it's not going to work. I also told my husband that on our first date. He said, so long as you never make me dance, I will think you're funny. And he still thinks I'm funny. If students have the freedom to be accepted, oh, Bethany, she was one of my students too. If students have the freedom to be accepted and believed, and that they'll have extensions if they need them or whatever other accommodations, are so much likely to try harder. I feel like I'm able to jump if there isn't somebody at the bottom waiting to punish me if I fall. Yes, Bethany. Bethany was a student of mine she's fantastic. She's who everybody wants to have in their class. And a lot of professors at our school have these like, you can miss 3 days of class and no more policies. And so what a lot of students do is they spend those 3 days carefully, but they spend them. And what I've heard from my students is that because they can miss as many days as they want, they just have to make up the activity, that they try not to miss class. And Bethany is definitely an overachiever.
Excellent. Well, we're almost at our time. So before we thank Emerald, we'd like to do a very brief foreshadowing of the future. Our last talk before the new year is going to be a debrief and hangout, not next Thursday. Next Thursday is my birthday. We can celebrate. And rather than celebrating, the history of violence, you can celebrate me. And so we're gonna, the following Thursday, which is listed as December 2nd, but I think it might actually be December 3rd, now that I look at it. We're gonna just hang out and debrief about the semester, what worked, especially brainstorming. So sort of an open mic chat hangout. Anybody who wants to come is welcome to come. And yeah, so excellent. So can everyone who wants to please unmute and join me in thanking Professor Emerald Stacy for the session.